So we do ask that all the participants keep themselves muted during the recording because we are recording this. So as everybody, I'm sure, is aware, every little thing, dogs barking and all that, will show up in the background. So if you'll just keep yourselves muted, and then we will have William's presentation will be probably about 45 minutes or so. And at the end of the presentation, we will do a Q&A. And if you will think about questions during the presentation, and then you can go ahead and submit those to the Pro Organic host via the chat session. And then at the when we start the Q&A, I'll just ask William the questions and let him answer. So just a little bit about Pro Organic. I see some names on here that I don't recognize on the participants. So Pro Organic Belize, you can get all kinds of information about us on our website at pro-organicbelize.org. And on the website, there's also details about how you can become a member of Pro Organic, and also our consumer group, which what the consumer group is a way for people to purchase pesticide-free produce. They get on a list, and on Friday mornings, either in next to Hodie's in San Ignacio or in Belmopon, every Friday morning, they go and they pick up what they ordered. And it is pesticide free from one of our certified farmers up in San Antonio. So it's a great way to help people stay healthy during all these more stressful times. So if you're interested in how to, get more information about that, go to the website and you'll be guided there. You can send an email to proorganicbelize@gmail.com. and just ask for more information or ask to get on the list. So let me turn the screen over to William, and he will get started with his presentation. And like I say, if you have questions about the presentation, just go ahead and submit those via the chat session to the Pro Organic host. And then we will do the Q&A after William's presentation. So William, I will let you take it away. I will stop sharing and you can begin as you want.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm gonna switch my video off so I can go to the screen here. All right. So I'd like to begin with an introduction with Industrial Hemp. I would like to start out by saying that my focus is primarily on grain and food production. However, in this presentation, I will be touching on all the topics ever so slightly, and we will start out with a little bit of the history of hemp, and yeah, let's get started. All right, so industrial hemp is a centuries-old crop. We're all very familiar with it in the ages. They've used it for rope and many other products. And at the end of the day, it's been basically prohibited for the last 70 years. And God has intended this plant for us and its primary uses of food, fiber, and medicine. In Belize, now we have a history of hemp, primarily marijuana. And we were one of the largest growers at one point, I think in the early 80s. And this was something that got quite a bit of attention. And we actually had a situation where aerial spraying was a major issue in the country, where thousands and thousands and thousands of acres were sprayed with an unintentional repercussion, which is people being contaminated with these toxic chemicals, their farms being destroyed, and a lot of people's livelihoods affected by this. And eventually, Manuel Esquivel, once he got into power, he put a stop to this. And by that time, If you follow the history of the genetics and everything, basically Belize's original genome for our cannabis strains, cannabis sativa strains, had been completely wiped out. And so our legal timeline here in Belize, we essentially didn't sign on to the United Nations Singles Convention until December of 2001, December 18th, 2001. And then eventually, I believe it was again in the UDP era where a committee was appointed to evaluate the decriminalization of marijuana. Now, this was really an undersold story. Nobody really paid much attention to it at the time. And then in November 2nd of 2017, the amendment to the Misuse of Drugs Act was passed. And that's where essentially the decriminalization of 10 grams of marijuana, and basically you don't go to jail, you only pay a small fine, I believe if it's of $500 once you don't exceed that limit. And then there was a passing of law to remove industrial hemp from the classification of these narcotics. So essentially it opened it up for a statutory instrument to be created, which then allowed for the first hemp licenses to be issued in November 13 of 2019. And now, more present day here in 2021, another amendment has been made, or a proposition has been made for further legalization of cannabis and some alterations to the Industrial Hemp Act as well. And so right now we're all, I guess, waiting to see how that goes and where that goes. And I think just as recently as yesterday, there was an announcement that there's going to be a separation between the two industries from a legal standpoint. So now there will be two completely separate regulated entities and no longer as one document under one ministry. And so I'm looking at the market and where hemp has been grown traditionally. Now we're focusing primarily on hemp here, and we're looking mostly at developed nations. Countries like India and China had never abolished it, and so those old genetics have continued to thrive. And as you can see in the tropical belt, there really isn't much other than China and India. And now a couple countries have actually come onto this list since I've made this map, which would be Guyana, and then Malawi as well. And those are other countries that are focusing on hemp production for food. And so we go into the anatomy of hemp, and we have to understand that hemp comes from cannabis sativa. There are different types of cannabis. There's ruberalis, and then there's also indica, and those are more towards marijuana. Cannabis sativa can be grown for marijuana. However, there is a subgroup that's broken out, and that's where the industrial hemp comes from, where essentially the production of THC is almost it's non-detectable. And so here we're looking at cannabis sativa lin, and we're looking at two plants. We're looking at a male and a female, the male being here on the left and the female being here on the right. And you can see that this is where the seeds are produced. These are the male flowers that produce the pollen that then basically inseminate the females, and that's where the seeds come from. And for CBD production or marijuana production, it is essentially the males are removed from the field in order for there not to be any pollination. And that's where the different expressions become a little bit more obvious, and I'll get into that later. So where to begin, essentially? Industrial hemp is a row crop, 110 to 130 days from seed to harvest. Tropical varieties are incredibly limited, and that's because the market hasn't really been open in this area for hemp genetics to be explored. The US, Canada, and Europe, they basically have been pioneering the genetics for the last 20, 30 years. And that's where the CBD comes primarily from the US, fiber and dual purpose crops primarily from Europe, where they're really high grain production and very high quality fiber production. Canada is focused primarily on grain and food production, so their genetics over there are really well developed. And now I can get into a little bit about the growing seasons. Now, here in Belize, we have about 3 growing seasons that we can get away with, and in the northern climates, it's only about 1 or 2, and that has a lot to do with we don't have freezing. So I mean, the worst that we have is rainy weather, but there's different varieties that are suited for that. And now I'll break down the different cultivars. Now, hemp is essentially broken down into different cultivars, which are breeds. And we have grain and seed, which are monoecious and dioecious. Monoecious meaning that they have both male and female parts on the same plant. Dioecious meaning that each plant is a separate sex. And then from there, the phenotypes are what determine the genetic expressions in the plant. So here we're looking at 3 or 4 different cultivars. These ones, Bama here, produces a higher biomass. And you have 3 other varieties that you can see here, which are geared towards grain production and fiber. And so with fiber varieties, they're typically not monoecious, and only the European varieties have that, which is where we get into the dual purpose. So typically they're dioecious, meaning that they have male and female plants individually. Now for CBD varieties, they're all dioecious varieties because they don't want auto-flowering, which is what the monoecious varieties do. They flower and produce seed. And then they're broken down into different phenotypes, which basically determine the percentages of CBD, the biomass that they produce, the heights, and that's where these phenotypes become important. The dual purpose crops are all dioecious, and they're essentially mostly developed in the European nations. Now we're going to look at hemp for food. Hemp is considered by leading researchers to be one of the most nutritious superfoods known to man. This is because hemp seed is made up of the ultimate balance of all 8 essential fatty acids, including almost a near perfect balance of the omega-3, 6, and 9s. For hemp food is typically considered really one of the highest protein sources, next, I think, second to pumpkin seeds, as well as having one of the highest concentrations in magnesium and zinc. Hemp food can be broken down into 3 or 4 different categories, being hemp hearts, which is the shell removed from the seed, and this is the seed nut. This is the hemp protein powder or hemp protein flour, which is extracted from the hemp seed cake, which is a byproduct of creating the oil through a cold press process. Now, how hemp food is grown is traditionally as a seasonal row crop. It's grown typically just like soy or corn, and it can be part of the rotation of the 3. Belize is really well suited for growing hemp seed because of the tropical climate. It allows for a shorter photo period and allows for greater seed production and focus on building the building blocks for seed oil production, essentially. Hemp grain production in recent trials have shown signs of really great competitive advantages. We have a high 15 to 20% higher yield per acre compared to our northern neighbors. That's based on the cultivars themselves that we have. They're better suited for this hotter climate, so they grow a little bit taller and have more space for seed production. In European or Canadian varieties, they're typically short. They're about 3 to 4 feet tall, and that makes for a less plant to produce seed. Now, hemp for fiber. Hemp has been used extensively throughout history, with production climaxing soon after being introduced to the New World. For centuries, items ranging from rope to fabrics to industrial materials were made from hemp fiber. And typically the sails, the ropes that were on the sails, the ropes on the anchors were all difficult down from the salt water, and that destroys everything. With processing and refinement technologies in recent times, hemp fiber is now being utilized in some really ingenious ways. Right now, they're Volkswagen, Volvo, and several other European car manufacturers essentially use hemp injection molding technology to create all of the interior panelings on their vehicles. So roughly, I think the last time I checked, it was about 70% of those vehicles on the road actually contain hemp interiors. We don't notice it, it's on the inside, but it's all made out of hemp. It's really lightweight and really strong. And it's just a great material for vehicles and their efficiency. So hemp fiber, how it's grown essentially just like a row crop. However, it is better designed for longer photo periods where it focuses its efforts towards exfoliation or growing taller. And that's where the methodology or the agronomy of hemp fiber determines the quality or the type of fiber that you extract from it. So crops that are grown with larger row spacing, so instead of 10 to 15 inches, you'd have about 30 inches. There's more branching and the stems actually get larger, and that's more used for building materials. So hempcrete, injection molding products, and then once you bring it down a little bit narrower to about 8 inches for the rows, what you'll have is taller, thinner strands, and that hemp is used for clothing or textiles and other materials that are a little bit softer, paper perhaps. Hemp for CBD. Now, CBD is a cannabidiol, is one of the 113 identified cannabinoids in the cannabis plant, and it accounts for up to about 40% of what's extracted in the process. CBD is extracted from the plant's biomass, leaves, flowers. The quality of the CBD oil is determined by its profile, cannabinoid profile, and that is basically the percentages of each 113 identified compounds. And these compounds alleviate different ailments based on their adjacent receptors in our body, relieving inflammation, pain, so on. Hemp for CBD is a high-value crop grown more as a horticultural than as an agronomical crop. Practices differ greatly based on the cultivars and their specific requirements. CBD grown in the tropics have shown greater morphological volatility due to environmental stresses, and some of these things are exaggerated by the breeding practices for these specific phenotypes. And that's something I got into at the beginning, where I mentioned that these phenotypes are the mechanisms that basically tell the plant what to express. So its height, its time for flowering, the percentages of oil that's made, the amount of seed produced if it's being pollinated. And so a lot of these breeds are primarily from the United States because that's where the focus has been greatest. And they're basically like, how should I put it? They're more custom made varieties for specific types of CBD oil, different spectrums, and they're all very climate specific. And that's one of the difficulties that I think everyone's going to face across the board and anywhere in the world, producing CBD to a larger volume. And a lot of that has to do with it being so climate specific. Now, for dual purpose crops, and this is something I had spoke about earlier from the beginning, is that due to the amount of time that the Europeans have had in terms of investing into this crop, they've managed to come out with some of the most ingenious breeding methods that allowed them to essentially develop the crop that we all want, which is something that we can get everything out of without necessarily damaging the soil. And that's something I'll get into a little bit later. But primarily, this company, Hemp Flax, operates out of Romania, Germany, and the Netherlands. And they're the producers of this fiber that goes into the injection molding for these car manufacturers. And now it's almost been 30 or 40 years that they've been developing this technology, and even the harvesting mechanics is custom made just for this type of hemp, and it's really, really, really interesting. So now I'll get into a little bit of the growing here, at least here in Belize, and some of the things that I've managed to come to learn through my experiences. Now, hemp seeds are typically 3 to 3.5 millimeters in size, and they're pretty temperamental. And I consider them something like cilantro. Really, they're very temperamental and small, and they're roughly the same size as cilantro seeds. Except that the shell is incredibly hard. You couldn't crack a hemp seed between your two fingers, no matter how strong you are. Sometimes they're really tough. There's roughly about 21,000 seeds per pound. And after a good soak or a nice rain, it takes about 3 to 5 days before you start to see the little plants germinating. Now, one of the major things is that hemp prefers sandy silt loam, and it's basically better water drainage and easier for root penetration as well. Excess water and poor drainage will cause rot, and eventually it can damage an entire field within a couple of days. If the water sits for 3 or 4 days, that you pretty much have lost that field, regardless of what you're growing it for. It's just the nature of the plant itself. Inoculation, seed treatments are recommended. It depends on if you're growing naturally or you want to go organic. We recommend that you do treat the seeds just for fungus and worms primarily. And we recommend that you treat the day before planting or the day of planting for best results. Now, we've practiced primarily with mechanized planting. However, we have used small garden planters as well. And for best results for what we do is basically the same methodology for almost any row crop that you're going to do. You clear land of all vegetation. It's very important to interrupt the weed life cycle. We've discovered a really nice product, Yaramila Complex from Circle R. Now their fertilizer is really nice, and it has a slow release time, so the nutrients stay more accessible for the plants. And interestingly enough, we noticed that we had more earthworm activity using this product than we did with the other brands that are available out there. It is a little bit slightly more expensive, but it compensates itself by not having to use as much. You always work the soil to be loose and friable, and you also smoothen the surface so you have a nice even surface, and you ensure that you have good drainage. For mechanized sowing, seed drill is the best option. Row spacing of anywhere between 8 to 10 inches. The soil pH is pretty neutral. It can handle slightly acidic soils, but it would be best to focus on keeping it a more of a neutral pH. The depth and the density. Now, for heavier clay soils, it's important to have a shallower sowing depth, simply because you want to avoid crusting on the top layer right after a rain. That'll prevent the plants from coming out of the ground. Now, for sandier, looser soils, you can go as far as about an inch. Now, that's still pretty shallow in most standards, but it works best. For grain production, the sowing density is really important. It's roughly about 40 to 50 pounds, depending on the variety that's being used. And that's roughly around 1 million plants per acre. Now, for fiber, it's a little bit more. It's around 1.5 million plants per acre. So that's roughly 55 to 60 pounds. And that's what allows for the tall, longer strands. Now, for pest control and weed management, I believe everything across the board, with the exception of hemp fiber, almost all chemicals are restricted. There's very few. I think I only have 2 here on the list that are allowed, and these are only pre-emergent herbicides. So pre-emergent herbicides, yes. For pesticides, nothing is allowed. Essentially, all you can use are organic knockdown products, and we used EM.5. It was very effective. We also used the EM, the microbes. That was very effective when it came to organically treating the seeds before planting them. And then for weed management, there's after the plants have germinated, you cannot put anything on the ground. Everything would have to be mechanized. So if you're trying to take care of weeds, it's best that you interrupt that life cycle first. You can use a pre-emergent herbicide because it will not show up in the chemical tests for the hemp seed. I'm not sure about the other parts of the plant. However, it does not show up in the hemp seed itself, and it does allow for it to be used for human consumption. Now, this all has to do with hemp being a hyperaccumulator, and I'll get into that a little bit further down. So for the weed management, as mentioned earlier, you have a 30 to 45 day window. And if you have weeds coming up within the first 10 to 15 days, it will be a nightmare, especially if you're dealing with a very large field. Now, smaller plots to about an acre, it's manageable. You can clear it with a couple guys in a day or so. However, if you're dealing with large tracts of land, it's best to make sure that you have that weed management system down. Otherwise, it can be fatal for the crop. And we want to always ensure that that there's no competition on the field. And we've had experiences with some farmers avoiding our recommendations and sticking to their old habits. And there was one situation where they did a Roundup burn down, I think maybe an hour or two after planting, hoping to wipe out the weeds that were on the field, and no, it didn't work. It just left the field. And this is an example right here. You have the germinating hemp plant. This is probably about 10 days old, and then you have all these weeds here just popping up. There's no way that you're going to be able to cultivate that without damaging the plant itself. Now for harvesting, this is specifically for grain, and most John Deere harvesters can do it once it's 2009 and newer. They have the right fans and the right ventilation sizes, so they can also connect to some of the newer harvesting implements as well, which makes it very accessible here in Belize, because most harvesters or combines are pretty new. They're not as old as one would think. And then also harvesting can be done manually. This is an example of a dual purpose harvest. So they're harvesting a small amount of fiber, but they're also harvesting the grain as well. Now we'll get into improving the soil with hemp and the benefits of hemp rotation. Hemp is considered to be a soil builder depending on its use. Now this is where it gets very tricky, and we can go down the rabbit hole with it, but I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. Hemp is considered one of the best hyperaccumulators known to man, and it's even been used in the Fukushima incident in Japan, and I think in Chernobyl, they planted rows of hemp around the site in order to basically remove some of the damaged or radiated soil. Because it's designed to absorb heavy metals and incorporate it into its body. For erosion control, and I can switch to a slide here, hemp is considered to be one of the best erosion control mechanisms or crops out there because of its root system. And it has 2 to 3 foot root penetration, and it's a very thick web of dense, hard roots. And now this is really good also for, leaving it into the soil, and also for keeping the soil nice and tight. For soil building, hemp can be considered a soil builder or a destroyer based on its application. Now, because we're only harvesting the smallest part of the crop, which is the seed, and putting everything back in the field, that's where grain hemp is considered to be a soil builder. Now, whereas dual purpose fiber or CBD, we're essentially taking out all of the biomass from the field and not putting it back in. And that can be harmful, especially in your rotation. If you're going to come in and put corn in afterwards, you're going to need to put in a lot of heavy fertilizers, and it doesn't necessarily help the life cycle of the soil. So We recommend grain hemp because you're taking out the least amount and you're putting back a lot of biomass. And once you turn that into the soil, it basically helps with the mycorrhizae, and it helps with every other health part of the soil. Now, because hemp doesn't allow any chemicals, it's really great as a break. So any farmer that, in terms of like large scale farming, it's really good because then it allows for the farmer to not put as many heavy metal chemicals into the soil. Now, do Roundup and I think paraquat, yeah, and heavy chemical herbicides and fungicides, and just because of the nature of hemp, it's best to not do that, as you won't incorporate it into the plant and the products that you're getting, but you're also giving the soil a break, and that's one of the great benefits of it as well. Now, this is an example of a small rotation or a small field where industrial hemp is being partnered with sorghum, maize, kanaf, and sun hemp. Now, sun hemp isn't technically related to hemp in any way, shape, or form, just by name, but it is also a great product for soil rejuvenation as well. Now, I have a couple little interesting facts that I'd like to add. I wasn't able to touch on a lot of topics, and one of them being hemp fuel. Now, understand that there is a lot of debate or discussion in regards to hemp being a viable biofuel source. And based on my experience and some of the market studies that I've done, I find it to be unviable simply because of the cost of the oil. So if we're looking at the seed oil on the shelves, it's, I think, $21 US a liter, and there's 3.5 liters or 3.7 liters per gallon. You just do the math and you'll see that even after a little bit of refinement or turning it into biodiesel, that's an additional process, which is an additional cost before distribution and shipping and taxes. By the time it gets to the consumer, we're looking at $40 or $50 a gallon. It doesn't make it viable, even with production scale. It's so much more valuable as a nutritional source than it is as a fuel source, where algae, I think, is a very viable fuel source because it's so easily grown within such a small space. We can produce just as much biofuel from 100 acres of hemp that you can with 1 acre of algae. And that's where the economics of scale really gets into it and makes for a very viable fuel source. And so I want to get into just a couple little things I have here in this presentation. I think I will share it or save it as a PDF so that everyone can download it. But there's a couple interesting little articles that basically go into a little bit more detail in terms of the soil remediation and some of the studies that reflect just that, along with some of the interesting health benefits from hemp seed oil for people with atopic dermatitis, not needing harmful medications with side effects that can counteract some of these issues with natural remedies. And then some of the opinions are shared with this article here. It goes into basically all of the markets. It looks at hemp on a global scale. It looks at the trends socially and in a very modern way. And it looks at things very meticulously, and it's a very great article. It's about an hour read, but it's very nice, and it goes into a lot of detail in terms of where the market is going with CBD, where it's going with food, where it's going with fiber, and the different regions and areas that have really focused on this crop. And then also just a little fun fact, a lot of people don't know this, but cannabosum is a word, a Jewish word, a Hebrew word, sorry, for sweet cane, and sweet scented cane is actually hemp once you really look into it. And this article shows how the history of that came into effect. And one of the beauties of it is that hemp seed oil is a component of the holy anointing oil. So that's just a little interesting fact to show that hemp has been used for centuries, and it's been considered a very strong healing plant. And yeah, I would like to thank everyone today for attending, and any questions, please feel free to follow the guidelines, and I'm here. I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, William, thank you. That was definitely very informative. And we do have a couple of questions that people have sent in. So, well, one comment was that you don't need to convert it into biodiesel. It can be burned in any diesel engine as straight vegetable oil, as Rudolph diesel originally designed. No need converting it into biodiesel. Any comment
Okay,
on that?
well, yeah, I go back. I go back to what I had said earlier. If even if we start to produce more hemp on a larger scale, we're competing with fuel prices. And once you look at it on right now, as it is right now, it's not economical. So if we're looking comparatively, 1 gallon of hemp seed oil to 1 gallon of diesel, the price difference is so stark at this point in time. I don't see it as it really being an effective fuel source, because the amount of energy that's needed to grow the plant, it's almost it's almost contradictory to do so. I mean, you need to spend a lot of fuel to grow the amount of oil that you're going to be creating, and you only get, I think, about 33 gallons per acre, if I'm not mistaken, per acre of hemp.
Don't know. Yeah, does anybody know the answer to that?
But are we answering the questions on the chat?
Yeah, some of them are sent to everyone, so you can see those, and then some of them.
All right. Well, I guess
sent.
we'll go with this. Cecil Williams here. Is there a more productive area of Belize to grow hemp? It all depends on the growing season. Now, you would want to grow in the north during the rainy season, simply because in the south is a heavier clay soils. And we did some experiments on the hummingbird with heavy orange clay soil during the rainy season, and it wasn't very good. We noticed a lot of crop die off, and I think it just all depends on the time of year. So we also did a plot on the hummingbird during the dry season, and we had a successful crop then, but not during the rainy season. So it all depends on the time of year and where you're looking to grow.
Okay.
And then, is there a laboratory to test hemp for compliance in Belize? No, there isn't a laboratory right now to test hemp for compliance. There, however, is the equipment. I believe Baja has the equipment. However, they're waiting for training for them to use it. I believe that it's called an ionization detector, and that's what allows to determine the amount of THC in the crop.
So your understanding is that Baja has that?
Yes, they have the equipment for a fact. It's just I don't know what the situation is on the training. So you can call Baja and you can ask them if they have it. They do have it, however, they don't have the personnel trained to operate the equipment. And I think they bought it in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, from an El Salvadorian company. To whom are you buying hemp seed fitting tropical seeds? Now we had a breeder out of Asia come down and help us for the last 3 years put together our own variety, and now that's what we've been working with. Something that's acclimatized. It follows the photo period, so we know now exactly when to grow it, and essentially, having done those trials for the last 3 years, we were able to determine that yes, we can grow hemp all throughout the year. It just depends on where and on during what season.
Okay. And somebody also asked, are they certified seeds?
Yeah, Yes, they are certified seeds. We have determined from a lab in Philadelphia that the variety that we have is 0.1% THC. And so it's fit for human consumption and the international market.
Okay.
Yes, we do have a processing facility for hemp seed. We right now are actually working on a little bit of some of the distribution challenges, but we should have our products on the shelves within the next coming months. But yes, there is a processing facility. We currently have it in Belize City, and the reason we have it centralized there is because of the northern and southern farmers, and we tried to look for the best place for ease of access. So the shipping now, let's say for example, a farmer has 200 acres worth of product that they need to ship. And it will cost them roughly $1,200 to get it here. And we tried to balance that out between the Cayo district, the Sand Creek district, and Orange Walk district. So we looked at Belize City as the best option for now. What is the process to become a hemp grower? Well, right now, we recommend that you seek a license through Baja. You can go on their website. They have the application procedures. They have all the forms, and you can break it down. If you want to be a hemp farmer, you want to register your farm itself. And from the last time we did it, I believe you have to do both. You have to register yourself as a farmer and then register your farm to be licensed. And I think that might be changing soon. I'm not exactly sure. We've been lobbying to open it up so that you don't require a license for the farming of hemp, because one, it can never be turned into marijuana. And with just a little bit of training, the police will be able to identify the difference. I mean, just by looking at it, you can essentially tell the difference because marijuana is grown 10, 20 feet apart, whereas hemp is millions of plants per acre. So it's almost indistinguishable. What potential for hempcrete is being considered in Belize? I believe there was a gentleman that was looking into hempcrete, I think in 2016. John Dunn or something like that. I can't remember his name. It is potential. There is potential. However, the equipment for the processing of hemp fiber or hemp stalks into what they call hemp hurd, which is what you use for hempcrete. From what I can understand, it is rather expensive, but it's something that I think with a little bit of investigation, I believe there may be a viable option. However, some of our varieties can be grown for hemp fiber. It just depends on the time of year. And for fiber, we determined that January is the best time to plant for fiber.
And there's some questions that were sent. One is, are you processing and selling the grains here in Belize? And
could you repeat the question?
Are you processing and selling the grains here in Belize?
We're not selling the grains. We're processing the grains into hemp oil and seed cake at the moment. And yes, we are looking to sell the products here locally.
But not yet. I think you said soon, right?
Yeah, it'll take a couple months because we're just negotiating with some distributors at the moment, and we're just fine tuning our labels.
Mm-hmm. And how can a farmer purchase your seeds?
Excuse me?
How can a farmer purchase your seeds?
Well, for right now, just because of the way that the laws are set up, one, you need to be a registered and licensed farmer, and you also have to have a farm that you can grow on. Right now, we've removed our restriction for 25 acres or more. We've worked on a farmer's guide for smaller farmers, smaller organic farmers. And yeah, that's basically it. Once you have experience growing crops, then we'd be more than happy to work with you.
And is there a co-op in Belize for hemp?
Not that I'm aware of, no. No, not that I'm aware of. I tried forming a co-op with some of the gentlemen up in Harmonyville, and then I also tried to get some of the farmers in Green Hill, which is a Mennonite community on the Hummingbird, to form a co-op to grow. But it's just, again, the legal restrictions on that make things a little unclear. So it's hard for a co-op to essentially license itself and all of the different farms. So it's just the government kind of forces it for each individual to register themselves on the farm.
Okay. Here was a direct question to the
Sure.
host. Was
Yes, definitely. That is our ultimate goal, actually. We want to make our primary product be the Hemp Hearts. That's what our goal is, to export Hemp Hearts.
Okay. And only grow. Okay, so if somebody did only want to grow the hemp and then they could sell the hemp to your company and you would do the processing?
Correct. Well, that's how it's working out right now. Is the government needs to know where you're getting it from. They need to know who you are. They need to know where it's being grown, and they need to know who it's being sold to. So at the end of the day, if you want to grow hemp and process it yourself, then you have to register yourself for that. You have to get licensed for a processing facility. There's a lot of restrictions in that aspect. So at this point in time, what we're doing is we're contracting farmers to grow. So that way, it makes the process a little bit easier for them to get seed, for them to basically not have to interact much with the government in order for them to sell the product, grow and sell the product. The cost, okay, wait, there's a previous question there. It says, has the potential for hemp cultivation caused a substantial increase in the price of available agricultural lands? No, I don't think we haven't gotten to that scale of production. We're looking to get to around 10,000 acres per season, and we're looking at maybe 2 seasons. And I don't think it has really affected the cost of land. Actually, I've learned something interesting, is that there are a lot less farmers, but there's more farmland. And what's happening is that a lot of the industrialized farmers, some of them fail, and the other ones that are successful, they come in and they basically lease out and buy out the equipment, and they don't buy the land, they lease the land. So they basically take over the rotation from the other farmer and consolidate the lands through a leasing scheme, but not necessarily through purchasing. And that's something that I've learned here in the last couple of months. How much does it cost to register and license? At this point in time, the cost is associated with the distance that Baja has to travel. So it's, I think, $1.75 a mile or something like that. And we had, for our farms, we've had 4 farms licensed, and I think the most expensive one was $96. And that was 20 acres. We've had another 400-acre property license, and I think that was like $56. It just depends on how far the Baja officer has to travel to come and do the inspection. And that's what we've seen. The costs are really inconsequential, really. Do you have a point of contact? I will be visiting these. Sure, I have my information right here at the end. Oops, there. Do you have a point on? Okay, yeah, that's my information right there. who is our main market? Our main market is focused towards the European Union and also the American market. And we want to hopefully start out with the American market for now, just because it's a little bit easier for us to ship there, and the qualification requirements are not as stringent as the European market. However, our food grade products are qualifiable just because of the THC content. That right away gets us our foot in the door. However, we do need to meet certain standards for processing of food, and I think with time we'll be able to get to that. But for now, I think we're ready to export to the US market based on what we have. But the European market is a little bit more stringent in that department. Is there an established protocol in Belize for control of hemp production? Yes, that would be, there's a statutory instrument online, and then, excuse me, it's on the Baja website. That right there basically has all the protocols and all the requirements that you need to have in order to become a producer for hemp. Can a person get a feeding chickens? Right now, I think the limit is 1 acre, and I don't see where the issue is with that. I mean, you just gotta show where it's going. I mean, you gotta tell them where you're buying it from. You gotta show them where you're growing it, and I think the minimum is 1 acre. And then, yeah, if you want to use it to feed chickens, I don't see what the issue is with that. However, it's just you gotta make sure you meet the requirements, and you just have to grow a minimum of 1 acre, 1 complete acre, in order to qualify.
More chickens. Okay, there was a couple of questions up in the beginning that weren't to everyone. So you mentioned treating seeds for growing organically. What is the recommended treatment?
We did a treatment with let me see, I'm trying to remember the name of the product. There's Fovilex multimineral. There is, and that's a germination booster. And then I'm trying to remember. Give me a second and I'll get back. I have it right here in my phone. I just can't remember the name of the product. Let's see. I'm gonna get it right now from our agronomist. Okay. It's metallocate multimineral, Zintrac, and it's Cruiser Advance at 1.1 millimeter per pound. And their product is Yara Zintrac at 2 milliliters per pound. And also the machine that's used, I think it's an atomizer, I believe, and that's the most efficient form, because if the seeds are being treated, let's say a little bit more barbarically with a barrel and mixed manually, you have a situation where you actually overdose the seeds with chemical. And the seeds are sensitive in that retrospect. And so we noted that we had our seeds being treated in Spanish Lookout and then being treated in Blue Creek. And there was a stark difference in the germination rate. And we noticed it was the method that they were using to treat the seeds. And then also sometimes the chemicals as well. Some of the types of chemicals they use can be pretty harmful. Okay. Let's see. And was there another question?
Oh, and you had also mentioned using the EM and the EM5 for treating the seeds or for?
Oh, yes, I think the EM, not the EM.5, but the EM microbes. I believe Mr. Usher told us, and that's how we did it, was we had soaked them overnight in a barrel with water and a mixture. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head the ratio, but yes, they were soaked for not overnight, for a couple hours, left to dry overnight, and then planted the next day. And we did actually have a pretty good germination rate, I think of about 85%. But we had a little bit of issues with an imbalance of microbes in our soil. And so it kind of threw that study off a little bit, but we did notice a major difference compared to not having treated them. And then we
Okay.
have a question here. Have you produced anything as yet with hemp? Yes, we have. We have produced hemp seed oil, or organic cold pressed hemp seed oil. And we're looking at probably actually utilizing some of the waste product from that process for chicken feed. We just need to find a pelletizer for our hemp seed cake. And there is a study by the EFSA on ruminants and chickens with hemp seed cake as a feeding substitute. You can mix it with the chicken feed and it boosts, I forget the name of the compounds, but it turns the egg yolks green.
Green.
Yeah. So, you know, if you feed them the orange corn or a little bit more corn, it depends on the mixture, but you notice that the homegrown, or the, how should I say, the grass-fed or the free-range chickens have an oranger yolk, a higher protein content. And the ones that are fed a lot of cornmeal have that really pale yellowy color in the yolk. Now, with by substituting some hemp meal or hemp seed cake into their feed for the free-range chickens, you get a greener yolk. And I think there's a chef in the States that has a small farm, and he fed his chickens habanero or red habanero peppers or red chili peppers, and those yolks actually showed really red signs.
Wow.
Oh yeah, and this is just one of the first bottles of hemp seed oil that we processed. That was grown here in Belize, processed in Belize. Labels were printed in Belize. Everything was done in Belize. So, and even the bottles were made in Belize. But we will have a much nicer bottle, a much smaller bottle. This one's only a liter, but we'll be coming up with smaller bottles with open tops and yeah. So that is an example of one of the products that we made. Let's see what else. As a Canadian researcher and consultant, yes, I would be more than willing to meet with anyone. I'm more than happy to help. You have my information right here on the screen, and you can reach me on WhatsApp, phone call, or by email. Hi, perhaps I addressed the wrong person. Do I go to what happens to the heavy metals it takes up from the soil? Where does it go and where does it end up after harvest? Okay, so if you're using it for soil remediation, the best crop to grow would be fiber, because one, you're not going to consume it, you're not going to eat it. And the fiber that is taken from that crop and the leaves and the flowers, typically there aren't much flowers in a fiber crop. There's a lot of leaves, but that's left on the field, and the stalks are where most of those heavy metals are incorporated. And that's where some of these new studies for carbon sequestration, they're looking at the benefit of using hemp as a carbon sequestrator, hemp fiber, not any other varieties or breeds, but hemp fiber, because then what it incorporates it into its body, and you use the body, which is essentially the stalk, you turn it into hempcrete. And that's one way of sequestering carbon. That entire cycle right there is what some consider to be very efficient for carbon sequestration. And then also, because it's not being used for clothing and it's not being used for shoes or backpacks or anything like that, you're pretty much not exposing yourself to those chemicals, but you're putting them in an inert way that it basically doesn't affect us. Let's see. How can we get the chicken hemp cake feed? Well, I'm working on that right now. I don't know. I need to find someone that can pelletize it for me because the form that it comes out right now from the machine, it's not very pet friendly, I should say. It's not very chicken friendly in the way that it is. It's very dense and oily, and it just needs to be processed a little bit further. It needs to be thrown through a hammer mill and then pelletized, and then it should be easier. Or maybe just through the hammer mill itself. I haven't necessarily figured out what's the best form. I don't have chickens at home, but I would definitely like to experiment, and I'm more than happy to give anyone a couple pounds of it that we have. Yeah, someone commented on the achiote and the recado seeds for chicken. That's true. That is very true. Where can I get the hemp oil? Well, for right now, you can reach out to us by email, Instagram, or Facebook. And we have sold a couple bottles, and we haven't put it on the shelves yet, but we're looking at Baby Brody's, Save You, DK in Belize City, here in Belmopan. I was just looking at a couple stores in San Ignacio and Santa Elena. We're just basically trying to work out the best arrangement so that we want to make sure that the price is across the board the same. So no matter what store that you go to, it's essentially the same price everywhere. And we're definitely coming in a little cheaper than what you can buy online. But because it's such a small scale production right now, the economics of scale kind of force us to be on the higher end of the prices, but hopefully it's still consumer friendly. Hemp seeds for human consumption. Now, that it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for whole roasted hemp seeds, we don't offer that product yet. And if you're talking about hemp hearts, we're probably a year away from being able to offer that product on just simply because of the cost of the equipment, the dehullers, and everything associated with it. It's rather expensive, but we're working to get. And we'll, yes, these are the types of products that we are trying to bring to the stores. For this is food. This is something that you can use almost every day. Yes, yes, hemp fibers are very tough. And that's something I mentioned. I think I didn't speak about it, but it's one of the technologies that's being used in graphene as graphene replacement for batteries. And it's an incredible, incredible applications. What if you had contaminated soil and wanted to grow for grain? Would the grain be contaminated with the heavy metals? Um, yes, once that's one of the main things when it comes to hemp for food. It has very strict uh, testing parameters. Now they test for everything. So if I use Roundup on that field, they'll know. And it's not allowed in. It basically has to test zero on everything. And that's something that we're hoping that we can achieve because there's a lot of contaminated soils out there, and we hope that we can turn farmers around, and a lot of them do see the benefits of giving their soils a break. I mean, and this is something that can really help them out a lot. And it just has to be done right. And it's like I said earlier, it's the amount of energy that's being put in and what you're taking out. We're putting more energy into the soil, more nutrients into the soil, and taking out the smallest amount from it, compared to like corn or soy or some of the other plant. We're taking a lot out of the soil and not putting anything really back in. And I know that soy can build the soil if you plant it, and then 30 days after you mulch it up and put it into the soil. However, you aren't going to harvest anything from it, but you're putting into the soil, and it's somewhat of a similar process. Does anyone have access to hammer mill? Um, my uncle has one, but I wouldn't use it for human consumption because he spray painted it with God knows what. But if anyone does, I'd be more than happy to work with you guys. What capacity can your pressing plant? For right now, it's small. I mean, we could handle a couple hundred acres. However, the processing plant that we have designed and we essentially have licensing for is roughly 21 to 23,000 acres annually. So that's about 27 million pounds a year, is what we will be able to handle in the future. But that's what we're looking at right now. For right now, we're at probably a couple hundred acres. We can't handle too much, but it's definitely more than what's being produced locally. What are considered making a super nutrition breakfast bar for children who go to school hungry? Would you be willing to? With the hemp hearts? Yeah, definitely. I mean, the hemp hearts is where it's at. I mean, we're essentially hemp hearts are essentially peanuts without the shell. I mean, it's just jam packed with more nutrients, and it's got higher concentrations of magnesium, zinc, and those are all very, very good for not only our heart but also our immune system. And that's definitely something I truly believe in. I put that in my smoothies every day. I know I pay through the nose for them right now because I buy them from Bob's Red Mill, but I mean I use it all the time. I love it. And yes, I think that the children will love it too. If put into a nice nutrition bar, yeah, I think, and hemp flour as well. Hemp protein powder is also used in some of these nutrition bars as well. I've had a couple of them. Okay, any more questions?
There was one earlier that where did you find the right seeds for grain to grow in the tropics?
Oh, well, like I said earlier, we had to bring someone in to look at what we had on the ground, and they looked at things called like feral hemp, which is basically the old cannabis marijuana varieties that are grown in the bush, and they looked at that, and they basically broke it down to the parameters that we needed to meet in order for the crop to grow accordingly. So they looked at its environmental stresses, the flowering period, and then they looked at bugs. They looked at what bugs reacted and its THC content. And some of the feral hemp here in Belize is like 5% THC. And so we couldn't really use it for breeding. However, it gave us an idea of what to look out for. And then once we brought in European varieties, we brought in Canadian varieties, we brought in Asian varieties, and we kind of did a hybridization project where we took some of the best aspects of both the Asian varieties and some of the European varieties and incorporated it into one. And from there, we did a couple of years of continuous growing, and we did maybe 1 or 2 generations, and then we doubled down on it again, and that's how we ended up with our variety of 1.1% THC, grain producing, and it's a dioecious breed. So each male and female are individual sexes. Once you get into the monoecious or auto flowering, the environmental conditions really affect that crop a lot, and force it to flower early. And also a lot of it has to do with our daylight period too, because I think a maximum we have here in Belize is about 13 hours. And the typical growing season in Europe or in Canada is about 16 hours. So that's a 3-hour difference, but that makes almost a 45 to 50-day difference in flowering period. So the naturally the hemp would flower around 90 days. Here, if we bring those varieties here, they'll flower in about 45 days. And bugs too. Those varieties aren't suited for Belize just because of the bugs, and they don't have any natural self defense. Okay, let's see here. Is Neem allowed to use as pesticide? Yes, it is. Is that you are producing hemp oil? May I suggest tablespoon of oil in the AM each day is fantastic for health. Yes, actually, hemp seed oil is really good for combating heart disease. Also, there was a study shown that hemp seed oil was able to reduce cholesterol about 15%. And this was a study done across, I think, 2 or 3 months over with about 100 people. And they noticed with all of the people that were tested with the hemp seed oil that on average, it was about 15% lower cholesterol. And it's also really good for the skin. It's good for your nails. It's good for your hair. And most of the benefits come from ingesting it. However, if you have dry skin, eczema, applying it onto your skin helps it reduce inflammation and it doesn't clog the pores. Excuse me. Where can I get that hemp protein powder? I'm interested in including into a protein shake. Well, at the moment, we don't have the protein powder available. Hope you can buy it at the store. I mean, Brody's sells Bob's Red Mill hemp protein powder, which is going to be one of our products and hopefully one of our customers. Yes, about the hemp oil benefits. Yeah, I just went over it about the cholesterol and then also the omegas that are really good. The fatty acids are really good in building up heart health. Should it be refrigerated, the oil? After opening, I recommend, and that's a good point. I'm going to write that down. I do need to put that on my labels. That they do need to be refrigerated after opening. And interestingly enough, I was on a conversation with someone yesterday, and they said that they don't trust anything the ants don't eat. And with our hemp oil, I had bottled it in a couple of bottles and I didn't seal them properly and they were just filled with ants. Now, I don't notice that with Nutri oil. I don't notice that with any other oil on our shelf, not olive oil, not coconut oil. The ants just flock to it. So yes, I do recommend it to be refrigerated. If you don't have a good seal on it, yes, do refrigerate it. Otherwise, you're going to be spitting the ants out. Use the hemp oil in protein shake. Yes, yes, you can use it in a protein shake. It can be cooked with like olive oil. However, we don't recommend it because of the low smoke point. It's similar to coconut oil. It's not really good for frying. Like olive oil isn't very good for frying either. And the reason that you don't want to pass 250 degrees Fahrenheit is one, for the smoking point, and two, because you're breaking all of those molecules, all the chains in those molecules, those fatty acids. You're essentially destroying the oil once you fry with it. You can make stew chicken. You can do this. It's just like coconut oil. You're not necessarily supposed to fry with it, but you can, and it's not necessarily recommended because you lose the health benefits. But at the end of the day, it can be used as a cooking oil. Yes, yes. I saw a study where they were doing it with cattle, not only chickens, cattle and pigs. And the only thing that I got from reading that study was that it doesn't bioaccumulate in the cattle or in the chicken, so you won't have chickens with high THC or anything like that. That's what they were primarily looking for, was the bioaccumulation of THC in those animals that were then to be fed to us. So at the end of the day, that's a non-issue. In terms of for cattle, for building, like beef, like muscle building or more meat, it doesn't really make much of a difference what they're being fed now than with hemp seed. So the hemp food is technically more valuable to us humans than it is to the cows and chickens, but it's not like it can't be used.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions?
Some water here, excuse me.
I guess not. Well, I think it was very informative in lots of ways, and good to know that that you're doing this here in Belize. Kind of groundbreaking, it seems, and inviting others to join in.
Yes, Yes, that is true. In certain parts of the world,
Huh.
hemp seed is only allowed to be brought in as bird feed. And Turkey is one of those countries. They're not allowed to feed to humans. But yes, it is definite. And that's the hemp heart. And so that's inclusive of everything. That's the shell, that's the heart itself. And funny enough that you mentioned that as bird feed, it reminds me of a plot that we did in gallon jug. Now over there they can't fight off any of the nature. They can't kill off any of the turkeys or anything. And we did 1 acre in gallon jug, and the next morning there were about 1,000 turkeys on the field eating out all the hemp seeds that we planted. And we didn't plant them with any treatment, so not to worry, the turkeys weren't hurt. But I mean, it was definitely an eye-opening experience for us when we saw that. All right. Well, I'd like
Any
to
other
say thank you
questions?
to everyone that's come. I mean, if you have any more questions or anything, I mean, you guys feel free to reach out to me by WhatsApp, by email. I'm more than happy to help and share whatever knowledge I have. And again, I mentioned earlier, for those of you that are looking into farming, I did produce a farmer's manual, so it breaks down a lot of the things that that you need to be conscious of when farming hemp, and some of the things that you need to look out for. Some of the many mistakes that we've made, we've pointed them out there, and now I think we finally have something that can give farmers the tools that they need to successfully grow a crop in this country.
So would that manual be available to anyone who gets the license to grow?
Um, at this point in time, the manual is specific to grain production, and it doesn't, we don't break down anything for fiber, CBD, as that's again, like I said, that's not really our focus. But yes,
Mhm.
I've given out that manual pretty much to anyone that's been interested in farming, and wants to work with us, and we freely give that out. We don't charge for it at all.
Wonderful. And Karen has put up a note that if you know of anyone that wasn't able to attend today, the video, because we have been recording this, and it will be posted on our website in a couple of days. So anybody can go to the website and see and listen to the video recording there. And ProOrganic's next meeting will be in 2 weeks on a Saturday. It's just our general meeting that we have every month. And all members are welcome to attend. Again, like I say, go to our website of proorganicbelize.org for all kinds of information. Check out how to get some pesticide-free vegetables that you can pick up once a week, either in Belmopan or San Ignacio. Nothing in Belize City as yet. It's being discussed to ship things there, but not yet. But the pesticide-free produce is a great way for individuals, families, whatever, to get some healthy food in them, especially during these more stressful times that we're in. So I encourage people to check that out. And if you have any questions for ProOrganic, proorganicbelize@gmail.com. Just send a question there. You can also send an email there to get in on the produce list. And we thank you so much for all your valuable information and for sharing it with us, William.
Thank you as well, and thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to speak to everyone and share what I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, we will call this a wrap. And again, thank you for everyone for attending, and anyone that you know that would be interested in viewing the presentation, just send them to the ProOrganic website in a couple of days. It's usually up there, by Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week, or next week. And they can, so far this year and all of last year, we've had quite a variety. So it's a great place to get one-stop shopping done. So thank you, William.